My name's Nicole van Bruggen, and together with Rachael Beesley, I'm the co-artistic director of the Australian Romantic and Classical Orchestra. When Rachael and I put our heads together to collate the 2021 concert season, there were a few things that we wanted to achieve with this concert season. The first one was because we largely missed out on celebrating Beethoven's birthday last year, sufficiently in any case, due to you know what, we wanted to make sure that we still paid homage to Beethoven this year and celebrated his birthday, albeit 1 year too late for the big celebration. The second thing we wanted to do was, which is actually one of our main artistic aims with the Australian Romantic and Classical Orchestra, was to celebrate lesser known, underrepresented and perhaps underappreciated composers from the classical and romantic period. That's really one of our main focuses with this orchestra. And the third thing that we wanted to do, which is represented in this upcoming program, was to present to our audiences large-scale chamber music works, as well as the orchestral and symphonic works which we perform with the full orchestra. So we're about to launch into our EVOKE program, and the program for EVOKE contains works by Beethoven and Swedish composer Franz Berwald. The program will open with a quali for 4 trombones by Beethoven. Now, I didn't know this piece until quite recently when one of our trombonists, Nigel Crocker, proposed it to me for this concert season. And they are really very, very beautiful pieces. I had to research myself what an equali was. It's a piece of music composed for 4 equal voices. And Beethoven wrote his equali for 4 trombones. So really making use of the timbre of those instruments. The pieces really are quite exquisite. They're very intimate and very solemn. They were performed at Beethoven's funeral, and we thought a couple of things. First of all, they're something that could be a little bit tricky to program in a general orchestral program. In any case, they wouldn't come up very often on concert programs, but we thought that the idea of opening the program with this very sort of intimate, emotional and moving music would be a really lovely way to sort of set the scene and bring the attention of the audience into this really quite special place, ready to move into the Berwald Septet. The Berwald Septet opens with an adagio, and we thought that the link would work quite nicely with our programming. And also it's a fabulous way for us to be able to present our amazing trombone section from the Australian Romantic and Classical Orchestra. So the second piece, which I've already just alluded to in our EVOKE program, is the Grand Septet, or the Stor Septet in Swedish, by Franz Berwald. So Berwald was around in the turn of the 19th century. That was his period, and he wrote this septet as after being influenced by Beethoven's very famous septet for the same instruments. So the instrumentation is clarinet, horn, bassoon, and then single strings, violin, viola, cello, double bass. So Beethoven first used this composition, this instrumentation, for his very, very well-known and beloved septet. And that piece was so very popular at the time that it influenced a number of composers to write for similar instrumentations. Berwald was one of these, but also people like Franz Lachner, Louis Ferenc, Louis Spohr, George Onslow, of course Schubert. He expanded it to make it an octet. So those composers were all influenced not only by Beethoven's writing and his composing, but I'm sure they also were very aware of the popularity of that style of chamber music at the time. And all these composers followed on from Beethoven and wrote fabulous chamber music, which is really not heard anywhere near enough these days. So we hope to remedy that. So Berwald was a rather eclectic man. as well as being a composer and a musician, he had a number of other occupations. He was an orthopedist, for example, and quite an unusual character by the sounds of his biography. So I personally have a bit of a soft spot for composers like that. I think they, if you read these composers' histories and their biographies, they're very interesting people, and for one reason or another, they haven't been celebrated in the same way as all of the main list of names that we know today. So I really feel very passionate about rectifying this. The Berwald Septet has some really fantastic writing for the wind instruments, the clarinet, the horn and the bassoon in particular. Berwald wrote an earlier version of the septet, and he wasn't really super happy with that version, and I think it also received a little bit of harsh criticism from the early audiences. So he revised it and he made some alterations to it, and then in 1828 he published a new revised version of the same work, and it's that edition which we're going to be performing as part of our EVOKE program. So when he made the 1828 revision to it, he was actually preparing it for a trio of quite fabulous wind players from that period. And I can speak mostly about the clarinet player, as I am a clarinet player. The clarinet player who was performing in the first performance of the Berwald Septet was Bernhard Krusell, a Finnish clarinet player, who was also a very accomplished composer. So Krusell was really well known for his very virtuosic and fine clarinet playing. He spent time in Paris as well at the Conservatoire, and he was very fluent on the instrument, and I definitely feel when I'm playing the clarinet part for the Berwald Septet that I can feel Krusell's influence on that. The writing is not as virtuosic as Krusell's own writing for himself. He wrote some really fabulous, flashy clarinet parts. The Berwald is not quite as flashy as that, but there's definitely a sense of the character, which I recognise similar to Krusell's character in his music. Perhaps it was because Berwald was writing it for Krusell. Perhaps it's the Scandinavian influence. I'm not quite sure, but I do feel a sense of connectivity between those two composers. The other thing that is quite prevalent in Berwald's septet is his use of folk music. So whenever I come across a piece which I read has been influenced by folk music, I always look forward to hearing the melodic themes, because they just tend to be catchy tunes, and that is the case with the Berwald Septet most definitely. He was influenced by folk music, and you can hear that throughout the music. In my preparations for this tour, as I've been practicing, I can finish a session of practice on the Berwald Septet, and I keep singing it as I'm walking around the house. It stays in your head, becomes a bit of an earworm. I've also heard my family in the house singing my little melodies from the Berwald, even though they have no clue what the piece is. So I think that really reflects that use of folk music, which is always very effective, and it creates the piece. It creates a sense of a certain charm in the piece. I always find, and yeah, it's really lovely to have those bass melodies from folk music which the composer has then expanded on to create the entire work. So following on from the Berwald, the third piece of music which we're going to be performing as part of our EVOKE program is the trio, Opus 38 by Beethoven. So as I mentioned before, we wanted to pay homage to Beethoven, so we started with the idea of the Beethoven Septet. Then instead of just performing the Beethoven Septet, as great as it is, we decided to perform the Berwald Septet, which was influenced by the original septet, and then we decided to pair that with this Opus 38 trio by Beethoven. And the Opus 38 trio is actually Beethoven's own arrangement of his septet for fortepiano, clarinet and cello. So the septet itself, as I mentioned before, was extremely popular when it was first composed and performed. is a cross really between a divertimento and a serious piece of chamber music. So a divertimento was something which was designed to be a little bit more fun, if you like, often for outdoor music, for light entertainment. And Beethoven has used the form or the order of the movements of a divertimento in the composition of this septet. But as well as having that form and having those, again, the sort of catchy tunes of a divertimento, it is written in the style of a serious early 19th century, late 18th century piece of chamber music. So I think that part of the success of Beethoven's septet is that he actually wrote something which could please everyone. So the divertimento was immediately attractive, or the divertimento style was immediately attractive to people perhaps from the period with less knowledge about music, and it was a little bit more approachable. But the elements of serious chamber music which he was able to meld with that divertimento style meant that the more connoisseur type of listener was also very much fulfilled in the listening of that piece. And I think that has a lot to do with why the septet was so popular at the time. So the clarinet part in the Opus 38 trio is identical to the clarinet for the septet. So he didn't change the clarinet part at all. He actually, when he first arranged the septet for a trio, the publication is for violin or clarinet with cello and forte piano. And he composed it for a certain family in mind who he wanted to have the opportunity to perform that at home. Cleverly, though, he by bringing out the clarinet part for both clarinet or violin, he managed to broaden his market quite significantly. It was very much the fashion in the late 18th and the early 19th century for people to make smaller arrangements of larger works. So you see a lot of the most popular symphonies were arranged for quartets or trios, or even for two players, or for piano solo, or for piano two hands, so piano duets. And there was a really good reason for this, of course. They didn't have CDs, they didn't have recordings, they couldn't just log on to Spotify and check out the latest music which had just been released. The only way the audience could enjoy music which had just been composed was to play it themselves. So these smaller arrangements of larger pieces of music were really integral to those composers becoming well-known figures of their time. So this clarinet trio, if he had just published it for clarinet, cello and piano, he would have limited his market quite a bit, because the clarinet was a reasonably new instrument at that time. It was extremely fashionable to have a clarinet because they were the latest thing on the market, more or less. But not everybody had one because they were so new. So by doubling the clarinet and the violin part, it meant that all the families with string instruments and a piano in their salon would be able to perform it, as well as the clarinet players and the most trendy people who had the latest instrument in their home. So that's a really interesting point to make about the reason why these large works were rearranged for different instrumentations. The other point that I wanted to touch on about the clarinet part being identical for the septet and the trio is more about my approach to performing it. So it is a case, of course, that once I've learnt the notes for that part, I can play both the septet and the trio, so that's a plus. But having said that, I would say that I really approached the clarinet part quite differently if I'm playing it with the septet, with the full instrumentation, or if I'm playing it for the trio instrumentation. And the reason for that is more to do with tone colours than anything else. So when I'm playing with the full septet, I'll spend a lot of my focus in blending my tone colours and using the flexibility of my historical clarinet and all of the colours that instrument allows me to produce. I'll spend a lot of time melding that with the tone color of the horn or the bassoon and the strings. Whereas when I'm playing with the trio, of course, it's a different role that I have because there are less people involved, but also blending my tone colors with the forte piano is a very different effect than with the horn and the bassoon. The forte piano has its own range of tone colors, which I'm trying to blend in with. And so I would say that I really treat the clarinet part as two distinct works when I'm playing the septet and when I'm playing the trio. There's another aspect of the clarinet trio which I wanted to share with you, and that is my own personal relationship with the clarinet trio repertoire. Alongside a real passion that I have for the larger scale chamber music, which I mentioned earlier, I really have two favourite chamber music instrumentations. The first one is clarinet quartet, and by that I don't mean 4 clarinets, I mean clarinet with violin, viola, cello. And the second one is the clarinet trio, and again by that I don't mean 3 clarinets, I mean clarinet, cello, forte piano or piano. So these are my two favourite instrumentations for clarinet, and I find that there's just so much really valuable repertoire for those instrumentations. When I lived in Holland, I had a regular clarinet trio, and I played in that ensemble for about 15 years, from 1997 till 2012 when I moved back to Australia. And we toured a lot through Europe with that trio. We spent a lot of time working on the 2 famous Beethoven trios, so Beethoven Opus 11 and the Beethoven Opus 38, which we'll be performing in this EVOKE program. But we also spent a lot of time researching lesser known composers for that instrumentation. We performed works by Adalbert Gierovets, a Bohemian composer. There's a fabulous trio by Louise Fahrenk, by Ferdinand Ries, a good friend of Beethoven's, and also a composer called Anton Abel, who became also a little bit of a pet project of mine. I spent a lot of time researching his work, and I feel that he's very underrepresented in the classical music canon today. So that trio was called Trio van Hengel. It was named after our cello player Bas van Hengel, who sadly passed away a few years after we founded the trio. And we continued to perform music using his name as the name of our trio. And even though it was not quite as prevalent as it is today, we were organised enough a long time ago to film a live concert of ours in the north of Holland. And I thought it might be nice to finish this pre-concert talk with the performance of that trio. To round off though, I would just like to say that I am immensely looking forward to this program which we are about to tour. I can't wait to get back in front of the audience again. It will be my first time performing for a live audience since mid-March last year. And I really can't wait to get back on stage. The second thing is, of course, I will be working with my incredible colleagues from the Australian Romantic and Classical Orchestra, and I'm really excited to be able to make music with these dear people again. I'm happy to be celebrating Beethoven. I feel sad for him that we missed out last year, so I'm really happy that we're going to be able to rectify that. And most importantly though, I'm really looking forward to connecting again with our audiences. We have concerts in the Blue Mountains, Sydney, Western Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra, Newcastle, Muswellbrook. There'll be a lot of people that we can reconnect with on this tour, and I'm really looking forward to performing for all of you. So I look forward to welcoming you to the concert hall, and yeah, I hope you really enjoy our EVOKE program. Thank you.